tell you what's a high tariff nation is Canada. Canada charges us 250% for our milk product and other product, and a tremendous tariff on lumber and things as such. And yet we don't need their lumber. We have more lumber than they do. We don't need Canada's lumber.
For years, many American leaders insisted that the United States could reduce its dependence on Canadian lumber without serious consequences. The assumption was simple. America has vast forests, a large construction industry, and enough resources to replace imported wood if necessary. But the reality emerging across the housing market tells a very different story. Major builders, developers, and construction suppliers are now warning that the pressure on lumber supply chains is becoming increasingly difficult to manage. Home prices remain elevated, construction costs continue to rise, and one of the most important factors sits north of the border. The challenge is not a dramatic trade war headline. It is not a sudden export ban, and it is not a single policy that can easily be reversed. Instead, it is a structural shift that has quietly changed the relationship between the American housing market and Canada's forestry sector. That shift is now creating consequences that spread far beyond lumber itself. Here's why. Roughly one-third of the softwood lumber used in American residential construction traditionally comes from Canada. For decades, this arrangement provided builders with a reliable source of material at predictable prices. When that supply becomes tighter, the effects move quickly through the housing market. A typical single-family home requires thousands of dollars worth of lumber products. Even modest increases in lumber prices can add significant costs to construction projects. Those costs rarely stay with builders. They are passed directly to buyers. And in an environment where affordability is already under pressure, every additional cost matters. What makes the current situation especially difficult is that Canada has not relied on a single action. Instead, several long-term trends are working together at the same time. The first pressure point is production capacity. Over the past several years, Canadian forestry companies have closed older mills, consolidated operations, and reduced output in some regions. These decisions were driven by changing market conditions, environmental challenges, and rising operating costs. The result is straightforward. Fewer mills mean lower production. Lower production means tighter supply, and tighter supply supports higher prices. For American builders, the outcome is the same regardless of the reason. There is simply less lumber available than there once was. The second pressure point is domestic demand. Canada is facing its own housing challenges. Provincial governments are investing in infrastructure projects, housing construction, and economic development programs that require large quantities of wood products. As domestic demand grows, more Canadian production stays within Canada. No formal restriction is necessary. Market priorities naturally shift toward local projects. American buyers still have access to Canadian lumber, but they are increasingly competing with Canadian demand for the same resource. The third pressure point involves value-added manufacturing. Instead of exporting large quantities of basic lumber, Canada has expanded production of higher-value engineered wood products. Cross-laminated timber, advanced structural panels, and specialized building materials generate more revenue per unit than traditional lumber exports. From Canada's perspective, the strategy makes economic sense. More processing remains inside the country. More jobs stay in local communities. And more value is captured before products reach international markets. But for American builders seeking affordable framing materials, the result is reduced availability of conventional lumber products. The fourth pressure point comes from environmental policy. Forestry management standards continue to evolve. Carbon reporting requirements, sustainability certifications, and conservation measures all influence how timber is harvested and processed. Supporters argue these policies improve long-term forest health and strengthen environmental stewardship. Critics argue they increase costs and limit production. Regardless of which view prevails, the practical outcome is clear. Producing lumber becomes more expensive, and higher production costs eventually appear in market prices. The fifth pressure point is transportation. Modern supply chains depend on efficient rail networks, ports, and logistics systems. But lumber now competes with energy exports, critical minerals, manufactured goods, and other strategic commodities. Transportation bottlenecks can delay deliveries and increase costs even when sufficient lumber exists. These delays create uncertainty for builders trying to plan major projects months in advance. Together, these five forces create a challenge that no single policy can easily solve.